aboard Neil Erickson, and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on what part of the world you're. This is Darren from Model Railroad Techniques. So, as I said, we got a special guest on board here today, Neil Erickson from the Big Island of Hawaii. So he can be found on Facebook. He's recently done some MRAX virtual clinics with Gordy Robinson and team on Facebook. Sorry, on YouTube, I should say. So, welcome aboard, Neil. So, I always like to get to know sort of people about their modelling and their history and where they've come from and where they want to go to and their interests. So I suppose we'll get into that to start with. So tell us a little about your modelling history.
Thanks, Darren. I think I started when I was around 9 years old. When I had a paper route, I wanted to buy a train set from the local hobby shop, and I collected enough money to do that. And of course, I got scoldings, but I had my train set, and I don't remember what it was. Probably a Tyco or something similar, and it had a little 5x9 area in the basements. My father let me play around on, and I sort of kept doing that all the way through college and experimenting with HON 30. If you remember, about the time was Dave Frary and John Olson were doing that in Model Road magazine, and it fascinated me, these little teeny trains. And so for years and years I did HO scale, modeled different prototypes, and then somehow I found and fell in love with the Bachmann ON 30, and I see you have some photographs up there of some of my locomotives.
Definitely.
And the railroad that you have most of the pictures of was the one that I tore down not long ago after a bicycle crash.
Right.
And it was based on my location here in town. Uma is a little community, so Uma Railway and Navigation Company. And the logo was let your imagination run, the UR and N. But I had fun with that. I learned a lot. And I realized what I really like is the artistic aspect of building a model railroad, and I wanted to do one that was more representative of an actual place.
Sure.
And so when I could, slowly started tearing down that layout. But I'm a very avid cyclist, and unfortunately that comes with a lot of accidents, and that one put me down, and I got maybe a little depressed, and maybe I shouldn't have been so rash in tearing everything out, but it did help me with focus. And now I'm working on a new layout, and behind me is the portion of the second deck I've just begun, and the lower deck behind me. It's been an adventure. My whole life has been learning new things because of model railroading, and I think it's just a huge, big tent, and there's so many things you could do.
That's right.
And I'm sure you find that out when you meet with and discuss this with lots of people, eh?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. And I think that's the beauty of model railroading, I should say, is there's just so many aspects that you can get interested in. We're going to talk about dead rail in a sec. I've never even heard of this concept before. I think I heard Kaylee Zhang talk about it on Lionel's show. And then I sort of thought, well, that sounds very interesting, and thought, that's never even considered that would even be an option for, as model railroading. It was always like power gets fed from the track. That was into the story type thing. But no, you guys and girls are forging on and making this technology and working this all out. So obviously we'll have a chat about that in a sec. So a little more on your current layout. So ON30, mainly Bachmann type stock is by what you're saying. So sort of at what point are you at the layout? You at the point where you can start running some trains around and having some fun with it?
Oh, absolutely. The layout now goes around the room from staging to staging, and that represents let me back up a little bit. The railroad is actually designed around a junction and a branch line, and then everything feeds into that one junction on Oahu, which is the capital of our state, Honolulu. You've probably heard of.
Sure. Yeah.
And from here, it's about 45-minute plane flight. But I get over there occasionally. My son lives there, and I've learned a lot about Waipahu, which is the junction that went up into the inland part of the island and serviced a very large sugar mill owned by the railroad, as well as the pineapple fields. And so I became fascinated with a lot of that. And it wasn't just it wasn't just sugarcane and little plantation locomotives. This is a mainline Class 1 railroad with signals and K28s, C16s, and all of these. outside frame locomotives are just fascinating, right? So
Yeah,
I just
okay.
kept learning more and more about them.
I would never. Obviously, the geography of Hawaii, I being from Australia, that's not something we learn. So it's actually fascinating. You're talking about a Class 1 railway on your island, but sort of obviously shows you the size of the main island there that you have, and obviously it's probably dozens and dozens of other smaller islands that form whole, the province of islands that you live on there.
Yeah, that's true. The Big Island is actually so big it could take all the other islands and you could put them on here and still have room around them.
Right,
But that railway was on Oahu, and
right.
it's a much smaller island.
Wow, okay,
The railroad, the Big Island, just couldn't circumnavigate it. It's just too rough a country here.
sure.
Although it was the only standard gauge railway in the state, so I
Yeah,
did model that for quite some time.
yeah, yeah. So what's next for your model railway then? Railroad, I should say.
Well, I'd like to keep going, and at some point you'll see the upper deck show up in the background there. But
Yeah,
my goal is to have a place to go and just fool around switching for a couple of hours, and then run back down to the junction and leave some cars.
yeah,
One of the things that I wanted to do with this is not dead rail, and that is to run the lower level using JMRI, using some automated operations where trains could run in
sure,
sequence or via timetable,
sure.
and that would keep going while I'm running another train up the railroad in the
Yeah,
branch. So I think it fascinates me because it's always just me. There's not other modelers around,
yeah,
and at some point, the ideas of these remote operations might allow me to interact with other
yeah,
people from around the world, in real time.
yeah, definitely. It's something obviously I've started to look at. I've joined the Facebook with Gordy Robinson, as we've talked
Yeah,
about.
yeah,
He got me thinking. I'm a little bit the same. I'm sort of live in a rural town in a state of South Australia in Australia. There's not any other modelers close by to me. What I would call close by. So anything sort of an hour's drive where I live is sort of quite a distance. Um, from our
yeah.
standards, I suppose. But I'm definitely looking at the old virtual operations because I run a piece of software called Train Controller that is a German software, which is it's basically like a JMRI but on steroids type thing, where you can set up a whole lot of virtual servers and the like and run your train. So that's definitely something that I'm looking at heading towards as well and getting involved with that with Gordy and Co.'s help.
Yeah, there's Gert Mueller in Texas has been
Yeah,
doing this as well as Dave Abeles over on the East
sure.
Coast. And so there's some guys out there that are setting sort of the standards for some of this. In fact, Gert, I think, is doing something that's fascinating, speed rather, using Wi-Fi to control signals and switches. And so my interest in dead rail has now shifted a great deal toward Wi-Fi enabled receivers.
Right.
And the battery is interesting, and all my locomotives actually run on batteries now.
Yeah.
But I think the future is if dead rail will merge into remote control using Wi-Fi,
Right.
and the more throttles we see coming out, I think we need to support that because JMR is obviously inherently Wi-Fi, and using the
Correct.
Wii throttle,
Yeah.
it's going to allow us to branch into that very easily.
Yeah. Sure. All right, so we'll might as well head into, I think, in the dead rail because it's quite a nice segue here. So I bought, over the years, bought stuff from Duncan McRae from Tam Valley, and he's
Yeah.
allowed me to use some of his photographs and installs, so thank you for him, and I'll put a link below to Duncan's website. I just happened to, in my research, that I thought I better educate myself so I don't sound like so much of a dummy talking to you, Neil. So, and obviously we obviously came across him, and I sent you a few links. So, yet again, yeah. So thanks, Duncan, for your allowing me to use that. So, as I said,
I was looking for a throttle, but actually I bought a couple of throttles from Duncan, and he was making radio control throttles before he went off in this other direction, and the ones that he's sold me are fantastic. They work great. They're around here somewhere.
So as I said, before probably getting into the AML podcast, I'd never heard of dead rail before. I'd never even considered it as a concept, so to speak. And obviously, you sort of go down your little rabbit holes, and sometimes you need to come out of that hole to actually come and see what else is in the model railroading land, I think. And that's what I've done here. And so,
Yeah.
So I've got a list of what I could see sort of pros and cons. There's pros and cons no matter where you're going, full DC, DCC, and obviously dead rail, and there's a myriad of other. I think LLC, I think, is another protocol or that the people are looking at doing. So, so if you can sort of just walk us through what's required to run dead rail, if that makes sense. So how it would actually operate.
Well, dead rail meaning, the concept of dead rail or dead wiring means that there's no power to the wire or the rails, right?
Sure.
So we're using batteries in lieu of power on the rails.
Yeah.
Everything else is pretty much the same. The only difference is now instead of controlling your train through the rails, you need a receiver.
Sure.
And it's important that you separate the two, because you have a receiver that's basically radio frequency or frequencies are out there, and the battery. You can have one without the other and vice versa, but in order to run something that's battery powered, you probably don't want to run your controls through the rail.
Yeah.
So you have a picture of Duncan's antenna there, and you can use that with any DCC throttle. You connect that up to the bus, and now you can control your locomotive with the receiver built into it. And obviously that might have a battery. Sure. Some guys are bringing power from the rails to recharge the battery.
I did see that,
Yeah, like Neil Stanton has been doing that. And I bought some of those, and I think I got an early set because the batteries didn't last very long. Sure. But I'm going to get in touch with him and try that again. But he's also been teaming up with Wi-Fi tracks, and they're using some of his boards and some of his concepts to do Wi-Fi enabled locomotives using the Stanton batteries and battery backup, charging systems. Sure. So what do you need? You need a receiver, and like the NCE has a dead rail receiver, and you can use a battery. And you don't need to have anything else besides a throttle. If you're going to use Blue Rail, there's the Blue Rail trains, and you can run everything using your phone, right?
Right.
Okay. And you don't need you don't need a system per se. Sure. If you wanted to go Wi-Fi or a regular radio control, you could use either the CVP handheld throttle that connects directly to your locomotive through that receiver. And the image you have up on the screen there is really a good example of how you use your throttle independent of a DCC system to go straight to the locomotive, and you can control everything you would normally.
Right.
If you want, you can have a decoder in line, a DCC decoder, so that you can control all of the regular things that a DCC decoder receiver engine can have. So the difference is that you're sending commands via the air.
Sure.
And so it sort of begs the question, why bother with the batteries if you have all these rails out there using, that can conduct electricity? Well, maybe you want to weather the rails on a railroad that had wooden rails.
Sure.
Maybe you would like to worry about your frogs or your switch points being powered. There's a lot of good reasons. Maybe you just want to have a small section of the railroad that has some power, or none at all.
Sure,
I think some people like me have a real aversion to wiring, although honestly, there's a lot of wiring when it comes to installing these. So if you're going to try to do this yourself, you're going to learn there's a lot of little bits that have to go in your locomotive.
Yeah.
So, it's a lot of fun. I mean, I've gone down this rabbit hole for a couple of years now.
Yeah. Is it the sort of thing that obviously the bigger, at this point in time, because obviously when DCC decoders came out, they were big and bulky. They only sort of went into bigger type locomotives. So, and now we've seen the latest generation of technology that's gone to such that you can get it into N scale and smaller type scales. So is this sort of where we're at now? Yeah, where we're started at a point now. Dead rail's getting to a point, because obviously some of the bigger manufacturers are probably going to get on board here and sort of move forward regarding the technology, which brings smaller footprint of decoders, transmitters, and the like to further.
Honestly, I think that we need to support the industry if that's the direction it needs to go, because right now I don't think there's a lot of interest in dead rail.
Right.
Mostly because of all the drawbacks. there is a concern about charging a battery inside of a locomotive, especially an expensive one.
Yeah.
They can swell up and overcharge if you don't do them properly or use good
Right.
batteries. The heat alone could be damaging.
Sure.
What I do is I pull the battery pack out and I replace it.
Yeah.
Now, if somebody could come up with a really simple system of taking out, say, a coal load or an oil tank, and
Yeah.
has the battery integrated like you would your DeWalt or
Your
your
batteries, yeah,
Makita,
for your
and
drills,
just
yeah.
drop it back in and it makes the
Yeah.
connection, right? Yeah, I mean, it could be that simple. If it was really easy and simple, I think you'd get a lot more adoption to that.
Yeah.
And frankly, everybody that has a layout should have at least one, battery-powered train, whether or not you're deriving the power from the rails, because you could use it to clean the entire railroad. It doesn't matter if the
Yeah,
track
sure.
is dirty.
That's a very good,
Why not?
interesting. Because I got a list of obviously what I could see pros and cons here. That obviously the cleaning the rail is, I don't think anyone likes doing that. So that's obviously the biggest pro. Then something I didn't think about, that I've got potentially the wiring of the layout's easier because there is none. But then obviously there's more complicated wiring within a locomotive, where a lot of newer locomotives these days is just plug and play. You just drop the DCC decoder in, but obviously you can't do that with this technology at this point. So,
and there's no standard.
No, that's right. So,
right.
I suppose
that's one of the drawbacks. Is it Blue Rail? Is it Wi-Fi? Is it RF? What frequency?
And I suppose also I could see another pro is you can run these in conjunction with a full DCC layout as well as what the direction that you're going in, Neil. So I see that as a massive pro. If you want to have a dabble around with something and you don't want to take the whole layout in that direction, say, you still got the option of running a dead rail portion of the layout to see if it's something you want to do, or specific, like you want to model, as you say, an old wooden rail section or something along those lines, or heavily detailed weathered rail, which is what a lot of guys and girls are getting into at this point.
Yeah, I think Professor Gleiser from down in Australia, I don't know which end he is, Eastern Australia, I think, he did a display layout using the wooden rail, and that's exactly how he powered his locomotive. It's very cool.
Yeah, okay.
I think Marty Jenkins down there in Queensland,
Queensland. Yeah, he's another one.
Or is he in...
He's Queensland.
But he's doing these HO scale 4-wheel drives.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Automobiles, and they're controlled with radio frequency and a little battery and servos. It's just a matter of time they're going to get small enough for what we want to do and get them all. It would be nice if it was standardized and everything could go right into the locomotive. But I think we need to agree what direction we want to go. And the only way we can do that is support that industry a little bit.
Correct.
It is really fun. I've been working on a Wi-Fi throttle based on the MRH hobbyist forum, and my railroad room right now is such a chaos. I can't find anything because it's everywhere. I suppose
that's okay. So is mine. Don't worry.
Right? Yeah, it's good fun. But right in front of me probably is one of the throttles I've been working on.
Sure.
It's good fun.
So, I suppose another big pro is, obviously we talked about, you can use your current DCC systems, which I think is massive, because sometimes within model railroading, and particularly if you've gone from DC to DCC, that is a massive jump in cost. Not so much complexity of wiring, depending on the toggle switches and the cabin control you're using, but to sort of go into this is, I think, less of a financial burden. Because if you've already got that side of things within that locomotive, you're just buying the ancillary hardware that goes along with it to make it function as per radio
it's
control.
Not cheap. Yeah, the radio control, the receivers can be somewhere between $50 and $100.
Oh, okay.
I mean,
if
that was the only thing that you had to get, then you'd be in top shape. But you're going to need the battery and maybe some way to charge it. And of course, one set of batteries isn't probably enough. I've been buying batteries off of eBay, and I try to find people that are selling, protected batteries, right?
Sure.
And then I'll make my own battery packs. So they're not horribly expensive.
Yeah.
But you have to be comfortable wiring, these 30 gauge wires.
Yeah. Okay. How long does
running out of tin.
how long does it take to charge a battery? I suppose is the next logical question.
Oh, maybe half hour,
Oh,
and then
okay.
then I've been able to run a locomotive intermittently, slowly for minutes to an hour after that.
Okay.
But you don't normally just running your locomotive like a parade around and around, right?
No.
So I mean, you can like an exhibition layout.
Sure. Do you have sound decoders in yours? That's going to diminish battery life, I would think. But is that something you run, or you just run just a?
Two of them
Yeah.
do. Yeah, they have DCC decoders in sound,
Sure.
and so the others, well, the Bluetooth ones have sound, but it comes from the handheld controller, so it's
Okay.
not quite the same.
Yeah. Okay.
I had thought about having Bluetooth speakers somewhere on, around the layout where you could have it coming, but it's not the same as having a decoder in the locomotive with speakers, and I really like that.
Yeah.
They does really eat up the battery though,
Yeah.
having the speakers and the decoder. So you have to get used to that, shortening your battery life, especially if you do a lot of, stuff with it.
Yeah, sure. Do you know of anyone out there, or is it something you're looking at doing, sort of your top deck that you said where you were going to be looking at running trains and shunting them around where you've got trains on schedules running JMRI? I suppose I'm trying to liken the program that I run. As I said, Train Controller requires some sort of feedback from an occupancy detection unit. So is there something out there that you know of that, besides using infrared, I suppose, is one way of doing it, where you're physically breaking a beam at a given track that people?
Well, I'm using track power to be detected using something from NCE called a BD10.
Right,
I don't know what it stands for, but you run it through the bus, one of the wires from the bus through the coil, and it will detect the current traveling through there, and then that information goes to JMRI.
So you can still use it even then. Okay, that's good. Yep.
Yeah. And I do have a bunch of IR detectors because I'd like to be able to detect fouling points.
Yeah.
And so I have, I don't know, 40 of them, but I haven't started drilling holes and running those wires yet.
Okay.
Yeah. So much for dead rail being simpler, right?
Well, I suppose it's like anything with model trains. If it's something that interests you to build these systems, because it's no different that I see from DCC. Like, you get the basic DCC, and then I want to run trains from my layouts, either fully automatic, running trains around to create all this bridge traffic and mayhem on the layout, to stuff that I run fully manually. It's no different whether you're doing it with hardware, where mine's a lot of software based coding, where you're just building blocks to sort of get to where you want to it. So it's whatever interests you. I think that's the beauty of this hobby, and I don't think anyone can sort of have a go at any other person for doing it this way. Well, that's what I like doing. Like, some people like super detailing craftsmanship buildings, and they might have one track.
Yeah, there's a lot of facets to this hobby. I was going to reach over here and grab some signal heads that I got from Shapeways, because these the railroad on Oahu had semaphores everywhere, right? And so these are just fabulous, right? In O scale, so they'll be really great for my home road, where the stations are located, as well as out on the line. Sure. And the servos that will run these are all controlled through a Megapoints controller from Great Britain, and they have it down to a science, so that even when the signal drops, it will bounce a little bit, like it has some mass. It's fascinating. Okay. Yeah, it should be really fun. Oh, you're looking at a locomotive behind us in my hometown of Mount Vernon, Washington, and my father was fascinated with it, went out, took a bunch of pictures, and so I thought I'd surprise him, and I found this RS9 in S scale.
Oh, wow.
It could never be easy, right?
No.
So I've been repeating it, and I got some decals for it, and so I've been working on that, and I'm looking for detail parts to make it look more like the one that's in that town. Right. So hopefully he'll be happy.
No, it's a lovely looking locomotive. We got one very similar here. It's like what we call an 800 class locomotive, which is not too dissimilar, maybe just a little bit longer hood than that, and that's with an Alco motor in it. So from the United States. So
I think these are all GEs.
GEs. Okay.
Yeah. I have to admit, knowing so little about your railways, except there's probably 5 different gauges, and that alone is fascinating.
Yeah, not so much anymore. There was a town sort of north, probably 8-hour drive north of Adelaide, South Australia, which is the home city of this state. That had, I think it was 4 or 5 different gauges. Yes, it's because back in the day, the Commonwealth government, our federal government, and the states couldn't work out what gauge railway they were going to run. So this poor town had this conglomeration of everything coming in. So that meant servicing facilities and roundhouses and all sorts of things, all these different gauges, and it was just ridiculous. It's quite interesting. There's a sort of a museum up there that I like going up. It's called Steamtown, and it's got just look at all the thing, part of the old track, and just so labour intensive, because what they used to have to do is, like, if a train came in from Sydney, which was from 12 hours east of that location to here, and it was continuing through to Perth, which is another 12 hours west, they would have to physically unload the freight train by hand.
I like the interaction between the different gauges. I think that's fascinating. My daughter was interning at James Cook University up, what is that, northeast.
Yeah.
And I was looking for an opportunity to visit her at some point. But maybe she goes back.
Yeah, lovely.
So that's fun. Yeah.
So, all right, just back on Dead Rail briefly. So
Sure.
I read an interesting article that I think Duncan put out, that he goes the future, what he thinks it might be, and it was quite interesting because you brought up about charging being a bit of an issue regarding charging these batteries correctly. So he could see it even going to something on the lines of like the wireless mobile phone, where you basically pull your locomotive into a service shed, and actually there's facility within that service shed. You set it up and it charges your battery. Obviously, where mobile phones have come a long way to be able to get to that point, but it's an interesting concept that moving forward, if that could ever be done, that would be.
I actually bought I bought a couple of coils used for wireless charging, but they have to be within about 5 millimeters of one another to make a difference. I mean, it's kind of like, charging the Apple Watch.
Yeah.
You have to literally set it right on the plastic.
That's right.
Charging. And so I think that's probably not the direction I'd like to see it go, because generally you're out on the line, you're switching, and there's no way of knowing how long the battery is going to last unless there's going to be some sort of feedback. I think Duncan's capable of figuring that out, but
and that was another thing he did bring up.
And all of a sudden there's no sound, right, and the locomotive stops.
Yeah,
that's
no,
not fun.
He did say that as another part. He goes a two-way direct, like bi-directional communication between the locomotive to report that type of information back of battery power, speed, even when as far as saying possibly even location within the layout. And I wouldn't even know how you would do that, but he's a very clever gentleman, as you've pointed out. So,
well, I like the idea of being able to charge somewhere along the line, and maybe every time you come to a water tower, you have to drop the spigot down and make the electrical connection, and let it charge for a little bit.
Yeah, that's a good
right?
idea.
And then you can move on. And the Bluetooth or the Wi-Fi should have the bi-directional communication, and we should be able to know how much water or fuel do we have left in the locomotive.
Yeah.
Or in the locomotive. I don't know. That doesn't. Well, obviously, I have no clue how to do it, but that would be really interesting if someone could figure that out.
Yeah. The mind boggles, doesn't it? It's just a matter of someone to come up with someone's probably come up with it somewhere, I would think. So
it's a matter of time.
That's right.
But it's been, I love going and reading about it, but I also love building models. And so I've been going down these rabbit holes more and more. And I find myself frustrated. And then I go, what am I doing? I want to just go build the railroad. And so, I started this a year ago, January, and now I'm thinking, what have I been doing all this time?
Yeah. It's like that.
I could have a lot more done.
Yeah. Well, it's like my current railway. I think I'm 12 years into it. So, and I've got to a point where I'm nearly ready to drive the Golden Spike on it, probably in the coming months. So that should be very exciting. So and then it needs a good clean, you might say, the layout. So, because it's I'm sort of very ad hoc. I'll get interested in something, so I'll quickly go and do wiring or something like that, and then I get bored with that, and I'll go and do scenery, and then, but little do I clean up in between each of these projects, and sort of stuff everywhere. So
we justify it by saying it's a hobby, right? But it's hard if you don't treat it a little bit with some diligence. I recently got a big roll of butcher paper, and I've been spreading it out so I can make sure I'm not ruining everything I've already done on the lower deck.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah. Right. No, I've done that. I did a video on how not to do scenery. I got all excited and did a whole lot of scenery along the front of my layout, and then realised you should have done the stuff against the backdrop first before worrying about the front. So and I've damaged a lot of that scenery. So it was a tongue-in-cheek video.
Speaking of backdrops, this is embarrassing how much time I've spent researching this, because I don't know if you can tell from here, but the ceiling slopes on either side of the railroad. Yeah. This is up in an old hayloft. Yeah. And so, the ceiling is okay where I've made it, but the room is actually much bigger. So there's a lot of void spaces behind the railroad.
Sure.
And I got to thinking, what if my backdrop was actually a sheet of plexiglass, and I put a film on it that allowed me to project images onto that, like a rear projection screen.
Yeah, okay.
Screen. And of the sky and the sunrise and the moon, and you could watch clouds roll by or a thunder shower come by, and you can put them all side by side. These little Pico rear display systems can be integrated in the MacBook, so I could have 5 or 10 of them all in a row displaying the same image rolling across the scenery behind me.
Wow.
And
okay.
It's insane how much time I spent working on that to realize it's not what I wanted to do.
That's one of those rabbit holes you get to the bottom and you hit rock. Can't dig any further.
Someday, maybe for an exhibition railroad, that would be awesome. Right now, I'm really having fun learning about the history of this railroad, and and I have a little hotel in downtown Hilo, and I met a couple from this town that I'm modeling. And when I was over there, I went and basically we arranged to meet, and the couple introduced me to their family who had lived there their whole lives. And
lovely.
They brought me some magazines and looked at some photographs that I had and said, "Oh, I knew so-and-so who lived there, and she was born in the house across the street, but she married the young man that lived across in the other building." And so, they could give me a lot of stories about what the place looked like. And they gave me these magazines that were published in the 40s. And just learning more and more about it has just been really, really fun. And it's the people part that makes it really, really interesting.
It is the whole
what was grown there? Well, you guessed. It's rice. They were growing a lot of rice. Who would have thought?
Yeah. Not just pineapples and sugarcane like in the north parts of my country anyway. So
yeah, well, the people who lived there grew what they needed, right? They grew taro and they grew rice and vegetables. But for the sugar company, they grew what they needed, and the pineapple company what they could sell. And so I don't think anybody had problem getting what they needed from.
No, that's right. So plenty of scope for all sorts of industries there, isn't there? So for a model railway, that's for sure. So.
No, it's fun, and they even brought cattle, and took it to the slaughter yard, and so they use the manure to fertilize the pineapple fields. Yeah, so I'm hauling manure back.
Yeah, lovely. Well, Neil, I don't have anything more to say at this point in time, unless there's anything more you wanted to touch on. We've had a lovely conversation about various parts of your modelling and where we're at. Is there anything more you wanted to add?
Well, I don't know. You showed a few images that My background is architecture. I'm an architect and was licensed in California before we moved here. And I enjoy doing track plans, and I enjoy helping people design. Even backyard railroads have been helping people design bridges and structures so that they support the live steam engines. And that part of it is really, really fun. And you can see I don't use a computer to do a lot of this. I like to draw it by hand, and then especially for myself, I'll flush it out. Unless it's something that needs to be done more, using the math to make sure it's appropriate. I'll tell them what size members to use. Yeah, but that's been really fun, and just the opportunity to take what I've learned through my whole life and apply it to model railroading has been, I don't know, maybe what it was always intended to be used for. I don't know why.
No,
Why
well,
does anyone pursue it when
yeah,
they
that's
become
right.
when they're
I'm very interested. There's a picture that keeps scrolling through. It looks like you've drawn a track plan on a piece of tissue or toilet paper. Is there a little backstory to that, or?
That was a railroad for a friend, and he wanted to model these circuitous routes up in a gold mine in Colorado, and it had all these spiral loops and tunnels and huge bridges, and going from the smelter down to the interchange. So I really had fun with that, and he had a really awkward shaped room. So I'm not sure what he's done with that, but he lives out in Louisiana somewhere. We've never met. It's just the beauty of this hobby, and the way that we're interacting now allows us to communicate with people from all over the world. I love that part.
Yeah, no, it's one of the reasons why I probably do these video podcasts. I've got literally one coming up on Wednesday. I'm just literally emailing people, messaging like yourself, and some people say, yep, no worries. Other people say, oh, thank you, but no thanks, which is fine. But I'm actually talking to two of the electrical engineers at the Miniature Wonderland in Hamburg on Wednesday. So
wow, that would be fascinating.
I'm really looking forward to that. I'm a little bit nervous about that one, to be quite honest with you, because it's obviously the biggest model railroad in the world, and it's a massive undertaking.
I'm sure they put their slacks on one leg at a time, eh?
Yeah, well, that's right. That's exactly right. So I've thoroughly enjoyed just getting out and about, and then putting these things up on YouTube and getting to know people all around the world. And I know we were due to come over for a holiday.
Well, I've had the opportunity. I've had the opportunity to work with a lot of famous people over the years, and somewhere along the line, you realize we're all here for the same reason, and we want to meet one another and discuss the things that are in common with us.
That's
so. Right. I wouldn't be nervous. Even just meeting you today was exciting because I like meeting new people, talking about my hobby. But it sounds to me like you're doing it for the very same reason.
Oh, definitely. I just want to. I think it shouldn't take I don't like dwelling on current world events, but it shouldn't have taken what it has to. We got the virtual NMRX that Gordy and team are running, and you and I are doing this, and more podcasts and more content getting out there. But moving forward, I definitely want to keep doing my bit to promote this hobby. It's just fantastic. So I think young Lionel
I love the feedback I'm getting. Yeah, I'm getting the feedback on my Facebook page too, and it encourages me to keep moving forward. So if you look up the Oahu Railway Wahiawa Branch, or Wahiawa Branch, I'm sorry. Let me start again. The Oahu Railway Wahiawa Branch in ON 30. And so that is the Facebook group page I've created to help encourage me to post more and make some progress on here. Sure. So it's
I might get you to
a lot of the doing,
I might just get you to put that up in the messenger, and I'll do a link to that definitely, and so people can come and have a look, and I'll post this if you're happy with that. I'll post this video up there. So
absolutely, I love the encouragement. Yeah. And like you, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, literally. Yeah. And I can't drive to the nearest hobby shop, so.
Yeah, well, I can do that, but it's still a bit of a hike down to where I've got to go. But anyway, these things happen. So anyway, Neil, so thank you so much for taking some time away from your family, new horses and everything else that's going on on your world right now. And I think you had some machinery dumped at your house this morning, I think you were saying, when we first organised this date. So as I said, I'm in debt for all these lovely people that are willing to come on the show and talk with me for half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, sometimes longer. So thank you very much.
Dazzy, it's always a pleasure. Please let me know if we can do this again.
Yeah, definitely. So if we get this layout along the way, we might just do something just purely on the layout this time. So,
well, I'd love to show you what I'm working on. So sounds good.
Make sure you subscribe. Click that little bell icon to be notified of upcoming videos. Support us on Patreon. Like us on Facebook and Instagram at Model Railroad Technique.